Welcome, listener, to the Inspired Writer Collective podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Stephanie, and I'm here today with our guest, Rhonda Linn. And this is going to be a really exciting, interesting episode about the importance of using your voice in your writing. So, Rhonda, welcome. And why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thank you so much for having me. Well, I'm an author and entrepreneur. I'm out of Michigan, and I have an agency that works with a lot of authors and also just heart-led entrepreneurs in publishing and in all kinds of marketing as well. I am the founder of Earth and Jar Stars not podcast, Substack publication and community, which has been like a beautiful space as well.
Wonderful. And I know was it about a year ago that you published your first book of poems?
Yeah,
Am I right on the last fall? Yeah, we're coming up on that. So what got you started writing and seeking to publish your poems?
Well, I think I've been a writer for as long as I can remember. And when I was in my past career, I really felt like, I did a lot of writing on my own, but I felt like it wasn't professional to share it with anyone. And even as I started my business about 5 years ago, it was really this process of stepping into my voice. And I had this experience where a dear friend of mine who her and I had been writing group partners and just shared poems back and forth for years. She got terminally ill, and as she was dying, she published a book, and that was like a kick in the pants to me in many ways. But for my own self, I was like, I do not want to be in the case of like being on my deathbed, and that's when I'm finally going to share all of these words that are on my heart. And so that really inspired me to write and refine and then eventually have my first book published.
Amazing, yet tragic story there to go along with what inspired you. But I think that's something that often weighs on writers' minds, is that feeling of like, well, if I keep waiting, am I never ever going to get there? And your story speaks so strongly to taking the steps to get yourself there. And so, how long did it take for you to put all your poems together? And did you traditionally publish?
Yeah, so my friend died in the fall, and it was not long after that that I started the Substack community, which is called Earth and Jar Stars. And I was so afraid to do that when I hit publish on the first essay, I literally went in the bathroom and threw up immediately. I was so terrified, I think, to share my voice. But then that community, has just been like very generous and very kind. And it was through that someone reached out to me and said, I think that you're like a poet, but you're writing this nonfiction work. And I said, that's exactly right. And she helped me to sort of like envision and write the rest of that collection, which I did for the rest of that winter, and gave me some really beautiful advice for publishing. And then Bell Publishing House published the book last fall, just about a year after I started the Substack community and after my friend had died.
Oh, that's wonderful. And are you finding, I mean, as you've been on Substack, did it take a while to get the community going? Because I know, writers are curious about, should I be starting there too with my work? What have you found?
I have found Substack to be a wonderful platform in many ways. I think that, there are very smart and kind readers on Substack, and it just, for me at least, I mean, I was on social media a lot before that, but it just feels like a lot more intimate and much more intellectual in ways that appeal to me as well. And so for me, at least, it felt like a really nice, like, entry point. And I don't know, it didn't take long. I mean, people, started to sign up for free and for paid subscriptions almost right away. And then I feel like their algorithm is really just nuanced in connecting you with other people who would like your work as well. And so it kind of, ripples out from there. And I mean, it's not the biggest publication or anything, which has never been my goal. Like, my goal is to foster the
Yeah,
community and to really share what's on my heart. But, I would think that it's relatively easy to use. And for someone that, is wanting to test the waters, I would just say, try it out and see if you like it. I've really been very pleased with it.
that's wonderful. And I love that you shared so honestly about like how you felt when you hit publish the first time, because I think there is that feeling when you put anything out there that's, in your own voice, feel very vulnerable. And so, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of listeners who appreciate that because they're probably sitting there wondering if they should even hit publish. And just knowing like taking that first step, it can feel crazy, but then it can lead to some really positive things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had really big fears that, that it would sort of like tank my business or that publishing this book would tank my business. And the fact is that the exact opposite happened. And so, obviously we want to like think with discernment about what we would choose to put out there to the world. But I also think that when we choose what we share and it comes from the heart, that people will respond with generosity and they see like I have clients who are paid subscribers of my Substack publication as well. And it's like you open up a different part of you and it can really like just increase the depth of the other relationships that you have in your life. And it certainly wasn't this sort of detriment to my career, which is what I thought, that people would just think I was all over the place. And because so much about marketing is like, you know what I mean? You have, like, your positioning and you sort of, like, have your lane that you stay in, but then if you branch off into something
Mhm.
else like this, it's exactly the opposite of that. And so, I guess for me at least, it was a really affirming experience to be able to do that, people could see me with dimensionality in a different way, and also I don't know, it just was, like, this integrating experience for me to not just have, like, this business part of me and, like, this writer part of me, that it all of me together in a way that I think was really beautiful.
That is really wonderful, and, I mean, I think it speaks to some of what I've noticed where I feel people are really looking for authentic connections with people, and they're not wanting all of the, phony fronts, and they wanna know there's a real person there, and so I think being able to be that way is so helpful, and I think it could be inspiring too. I mean, especially when, getting past your own fears. And how did you find as you wrote your poems, like, how did that help you push past that fear about what you were sharing or your ideas or publishing it?
Yeah, well, my book is called The Chapel of Small Breath, and in some ways, it's, like, a very dark book, and I had people that told me, like, "Maybe this shouldn't be the first book that you publish, Rhonda, because it is, like, in a very different tone." The work that I put out on Substack is very grounded and uplifting, and it's not to say that this book isn't, but it's a book about, a relationship of mine, a significant relationship that really fell apart, and how do you go through, sort of like the stages of grief, but not that neatly, of figuring out, "Okay, how do I envision my life again, and how do I, have hope for the future when, things are really pretty dark?" And so it's a book that speaks about hopefulness, but not hopefulness like you'd find it in a Hallmark card, right? This kind of hopefulness that we live through in our human experience. And so it was a book that I think I had a lot of fear around publishing, just because it was my own story and it was, messy in some ways. And then especially people saying like, "Ah, it's like not the voice that you've been writing in," but I think like I just kept thinking that, these poems have really been on my heart. And since I published this book, I've had hundreds of people like reach out to me and say, I feel like less alone, or thank you for sharing this. And so, there's like clearly a place for it in the world, that even when we feel fearful, when we have the like, conviction to share what's on our hearts and to share our words, the world finds a home for them, and I think, that we have to remember that sometimes, like, I could just keep all those to myself, but ultimately, I don't know, is it, like, really helping other people, or is it really helping myself to do that? And so that's the way that I kind of see it as well.
Well, and it sounds like, I mean, it helped you as much as it was helping other people. And I think that sometimes there's that piece of if you think it's going to help one person, it's worth it to put it out there, I feel, and it sounds like yours went far beyond that. And I think so much of the human experience does have that kind of dark messiness that we don't always want to talk about. And I think when people are in that space, when they find connection, it can be so powerful.
Yeah. I I really believe that our culture does us a disservice by, wanting us to be like a monolith and Instagram perfect and, to just present this one part of ourselves when life is really rarely like that. And so I think speaking to what you were talking about a moment ago, if people really want authenticity and they want connection, and in my mind, when we can have the bravery to model that in our own lives, even when it's not particularly comfortable, we create a world that's, like, big enough to hold on to other people's voices, and I think that's, like, a pillar of what I would see as building a better world is that process of people being able to speak their truth and, to live out their heart's calling.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I mean, that's a huge part of, the work we're doing of getting voices and stories out there and really helping to, amplify those because we all have something to share. And I think that that's one of the powerful pieces about writing. And so when you finally, finished writing your book of poems, how did that feel? What was that feeling as you kind of came to that point of the writing process?
I mean, I think it's rarely one thing, so it was a combination of feeling like I could have continued to refine that book, but then also, having the realization that, it was, like, finished enough and it was ready to share with the world, and, you know, that one of the reasons that I decided to go with publishing it with a smaller press was just because, like, I know that I have other books in me, and I, like, didn't wanna have it, like, spinning, for years through the publication process or just waiting on that. I was ready for it to come into the world and, beautiful things happened. My business grew from having 3 to, now I have 11 team members, like, just since this last October, since that book was published, and all of these things happened, and so I think, it was the right timing, that you sort of, like, have something and you worked on it really hard, and it's ready to come into the world, and will it ever be perfect? Like, I would argue that perfect doesn't exist, right? And it can be, like, perfect enough for that moment.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I mean, I think that we could all sit and, ruminate over a word or a phrase or forever and ever and ever and just keep going back and thinking, "Oh, this isn't ready. This isn't ready." And I love what you're saying about like it's ready enough, like it needs to be out in the world. I have other things to move on to. And I mean, I think that that's a really important message because I think that there is that piece as writers where we think like, "Okay, it's not really ready. Like, I'm not ready to
Yeah.
push it out the door yet," when in fact it just needs to.
Yeah, and I think that's oftentimes, you know, fear that's hiding as perfectionism, that can keep us stuck in that, and I'm, like, not talking about it from any high horse because I, put off sharing my work with the world for decades right before this, but it's just, kinda just getting really honest with ourselves with, okay, at what point is it like a body of work enough and I feel comfortable with it and, just to let it go knowing that, you know, perfect doesn't exist and we'll have to cut our book, right? And, I'll keep going forward.
And so what are you working on now? What's your newest writing project?
Yeah. So I'm working on a series of vignettes that are about rest, and they're about rest through the lens of nature and really about how rest can help us transform our lives, transform our businesses, and really transform culture. Because I think our culture just kind of keeps us on this hamster wheel and we're just going and going and going. And it doesn't do us ultimately, I don't know, it doesn't let us live out our best lives from the most heart-led place. And so this book is just a little little snippets of how we see rest in nature and how that might reflect into our own lives. I'm so excited about it. It's almost there.
I love that message because I know we talked about it early on in the podcast here about the importance of rest, and we still talk about it. And I know for myself, I see so much benefit when I take time to rest and how I can come back to something feeling so much more ready to tackle it and move forward. So that sounds like it's going to be an amazing gift for readers and others, even probably small business owners and entrepreneurs and the like to have your book.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, and it's a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. When I first, was starting to write about it and I was like talking to some folks, as we do, someone said, "You're the last person in the world that I would imagine writing about rest, Rhonda." And it's true because, overworking has definitely been a theme in my life and something that I
Mhm.
still, kind of grapple with. And I think sometimes we have to remember that, like, those things in our own lives that are really sticky and really challenging, those are the things that make us uniquely qualified to, be able to address some of these topics in a beautiful way. I hope.
No, I mean, I would imagine that as you've been working on the book, that you've probably discovered new things about yourself and about, what rest can do that can offer even greater insight. Because I think you're so right. I mean, there is so much of that in our culture around go, 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 go. You got to get the next thing. You got to get to the
Mhm.
next place. Everybody's driving fast. Everybody's rushing past. Nobody's paying attention. People are, going about their, days and not really stopping to pause.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's amazing. And so have you found that you have hit any blocks as you're working, or do you feel like this project is flowing? How does it feel similar or different from what you did before?
That's a great question, and I would say the other book really kinda came through like a channel really fast, and I would say that probably 70% of this new one did that way, and then I've been, like, in the muck with the last 30% of it, though it's getting there, and, I had hoped, that it would be ready to pursue publication here, like, this summer, but I think it will be this fall, which is fine, I think, just like you're saying that we sort of, like, have these timelines in our head and we're, like, hustling, right? But we have to remember that, creative endeavors take time and, we have to find our way through them.
And have do you find any, you know, pro procrastination or avoid like, where you're like, "Oh, I have other things to do, I'll get back to that later," that creeps in a little bit with some of that being in the muck space?
I mean, I
Being
think
in the
that's, like, a
muck.
tenet of the human condition, so absolutely. And one of the things that I think about a lot, I don't know, have you ever seen that little image of there's, like, a guy and there's one person on the left and he is standing on a ladder and the ladder has, like, really big rungs,
Mhm.
between it and
Yes.
then the one on the right, and it has, like, littler rung. And I think about that
Yes.
graphic all the time, with writing, but also just with anything in general, that it's like if I feel like I'm gonna choke on a project, I just break it down into baby steps and baby steps and baby steps again until I feel like I can tackle those steps. And so that's been a way, just that I've like approached the world in general, which I think can be really helpful. That if I don't think about I have to finish this book, but okay, I can sharpen this paragraph, or I'm gonna give a global view of this chapter, or whatever it is, then suddenly that becomes something that's digestible in a very different way.
Yeah, I love that you reference that because I think that that's such a important, like, not only visual, but just message about anything in life that, like, sometimes when things feel really overwhelming and you're like, "Oh my goodness, I can't possibly get from here to there," that just those little steps along the way and just breaking it down into smaller steps can get you there. And I think it can, I mean, especially with writing, I think, I think even with my own writing, I think like, "Oh my goodness, there's no way I'm gonna finish it." But like you said, going back and starting from the last sentence or starting from, "Oh, I can fix this piece or I can add something here," can be a nice way to approach it and take away the overwhelm.
Yeah.
So one of the questions we've been asking, hold on, I just dropped my I'll edit this out. My headphone just fell out of my
I'm gonna turn
ear
my
and I'm
screen up and down so I can see you again. My spread thing broke. Alright.
it didn't freeze on my end, so all of this can be edited out. Um, no, so one of the questions we've been wanting to ask this season especially is, what message would you give to writers who are just starting out or those that are stuck about the importance of getting their voice out into the world?
So I would say that, one of the most supportive things for me was finding community, because like you can just stay spinning in your own mind all the time. And so at different times in my life, that's been different things. I've had, like a friend that I would send writing to. I've had little writing groups that, were maybe 3 to 10 people at different times. When I was first starting my business, I started a Facebook group called the Homespun Joy, a wellness collaborative. And that was just felt like this sheltered community, where I could begin to share my voice, and then Substack. And so I think, finding whatever that community looks like to you in a way that doesn't spin your nervous system out can be a really beautiful way, because the truth is that, you know, having other people reflect our work, especially generous, kind people, as you're doing this to reflect our work back to us and help us sharpen and clarify ideas, just really makes it fun in a different way that's really helpful. So I think that would be one of my big ones, as well as just not being afraid of like putting pen to the paper and knowing that like you can, or typing whatever is your jam, but just getting words down and knowing that your future self will have the discernment to know if that's something to share or that was just for you, but don't edit too much as you're trying to write, like, just kinda let it flow, and then, you can always make those decisions later on, I think has been something that helped me as well.
Well, I love that you talk about community because we, of course, love talking about community on this podcast because it's definitely something that we've found and continue to find is so important in the journey that if you try to, isolate yourself or think that it has to be done in a silo, that it just doesn't take you as far in the journey. Do you find, I mean, obviously you find that to be true.
Yeah, I absolutely believe in that, and I think the other thing that has helped me a lot is just to really look at how I like to work and think. Because I'm somebody that if I just have, like a blank Word document or a blank page in front of me, I have a terrible time. But if you give me like a quote or um like an image or something, some idea, a chapter in a book to spring off of, then suddenly I'm off to the races. And so for me, even like I have these Trello boards where I just capture screenshots. Like if I'm on social media or if I'm just reading something on Substack or whatever, and I want to come back to that, I have that. And so I have this like virtual, collage of all these ideas. And so I never feel like I'm just starting from a blank page. And so I think, for other people that might be different, but to think about, because so often we say like, I have to write and I'm gonna like sit down at 9 in the morning and or whatever time of day and I'm gonna do
Mhm.
this. But really, if we think about, okay, what are my energetic flows or, how do I work and like what's the spark that I need to get started, then that can become something that's like very joyful and generative as opposed to feeling like drudgery.
I love that idea of having the collage of images and having a place to start. 'Cause I think that that's such great advice for our listeners out there, and certainly something that I'm going to think about now about having, you know, Trello board with images when I'm stuck. And 'cause I've definitely found myself in a little bit of a stuck space. So I I love that, and the idea of starting from what's already there, and then it can just help you generate your own ideas.
Yeah,
That's
I
great.
love that. I have mine organized so there's columns, and so if there's, a topic or a theme that I'm interested in writing about, if I'm just, like, scrolling on social media and I see, a quote or some little snippet, I'll just screenshot it, and then right from my phone in one click, I can send it to that Trello board, and it'll go right into the column, for whatever topic or theme it is.
Mhm.
And so I really like that as a way just to kinda, collect ideas and also just to be a little bit more conscious on social media as opposed to just mindlessly scrolling, as to think about, okay, how is, like, all of this fitting into this, collective, bank that's helping me to do this writing work.
I love that too, because sometimes I find that, like, I'll get into being on social media and then I'm not. And so that's a great way to think about having a purpose for being there of like, oh, well, maybe I'll find something that'll spark an idea or remind me of something for later. And so I definitely love that advice for being being more intentional about that time
Yeah.
as opposed to just letting it disappear.
For sure. I mean, I do the same thing, like, I'll
Yeah.
take pictures of little, paragraphs in paper books that I'm reading or, just anything, but I like that idea of, okay, how do I form this into this, like, generative bank so that I always, have a springboard, to at least start with?
Yeah, and I love how you talk too about really being aware of your energetic flow and, what works, because I think that's another piece in our culture, especially around writing, where sometimes it can feel like the advice out there or the guidance is so prescriptive of like, well, you have to do it at this time of day, and this is the only time of day that it works, or you have to do it every day, or you have to always do it this way. And I love that idea of thinking about, well, where is my energy and where am I going to be the most productive?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. My old, that well, I'm still, like, dear friends with him, but I studied with,
Yeah.
Robert Vivian, the writer. And he is, like, always writing in the morning, right? Early in the mornings, like, he loves, like, skating in that space between, like, sleep and wakefulness, which, works for a lot of people. But so for years, as I was a college student, like, I would try to do that, and it was just, like, miserable to me, like, waking up at 5 a.m. and, like, trying to do that, and it just really wasn't my jam. But, if I can just go out and go for a walk, like, any time of day, it's like a channel, and then instantly I know what to write, and so or thinking about, if there's times that I feel like I'm very just, like, brimming with ideas, if I'll just, like, go away to an Airbnb for a night or 2, um, that can work really well. So I think just really trying to understand that everyone's best practices with advice, work for them, but but they're trying you, and so you have to sort of figure out, okay, how do I, create my own version of this in a way that really supports who I am as opposed to trying to like just bash my head against someone else's like gold standard.
No, I think that that's so important to think about. And I think for listeners to, really take the pieces that work for you and leave behind whatever doesn't and kind of figure it out. Cause I know that I'm often finding that my approach ebbs and flows depending upon, seasons or whatever is going on in life. And so it's important to be aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I write about on Earth and Jar Stars all the time because our culture has this, like they're like in love with consistency, which I think that's just, capitalism, right? That wants us to be like nice, good producers of things. But the truth is like you look at anything in nature and like there's always ebbs and flows. And I mean, you look at a tomato
Mhm.
plant and in the fall, it'll be, like, half dead and producing prolifically at the same time, right? And then there's this, like, whole off season during the winter before they would sprout again, right? And so to expect ourselves that we're gonna be consistent day in and day out when literally not a single thing in nature is that way, I think it, like, sets us up to fail or for our culture to make money off of us, quite honestly.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely that, and I think that that's why the fear of failure is so big for so many, and unfortunately, I even think since I was a teacher, like the school system creates that same idea of like you have to be producing and everybody has to, you know, excel at every single subject in school, and yes, there are those that do, but the reality is that not everybody does. And then, it just creates that, that cycle where so many feel like, oh, I'm never going to get from point A to point B. And yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you're so right. And I love that image of nature and just thinking about how much we can learn. Like you said, you're writing about it with the power for rest and just even you mentioning going out for a walk. Just that time outside in nature is can be so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I was also a teacher, and so I can resonate with so much you're saying there. And before I, um, transitioned to work in higher education, we were when I added up the days that we were doing assessments, it was a quarter of the year, quarter of the academic year. And
Mhm.
so I think about that all the time, through the lens of what we're talking about. They say, like, you can't or I forgot, like, exactly what the phrase is, but it's like, "A pig won't grow if you just keep on weighing it all the time," or something like that.
Mhm.
And our education system is like that, and so we have that standard for ourselves, right, of, like, constantly measuring, like, what is my success and how am I boiling up to, what I want to be, but the reality is that things take time to grow, and so when we can just be a little bit kinder to ourselves and be, more generous to those times that we do need to rest or when we're not writing as prolifically or whatever without making those wrong, then we're able to hit the gas in different ways that may not have been accessible to us before.
Yeah, no, that's so true. You're so right about that. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation today. I feel like we covered so many aspects of your writing journey and the writing process. And is there anything else you'd like to say for our listeners today?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I would just, encourage everyone to, keep writing and to find joy in it and to find community and know that beautiful things unfold. So I'm grateful to be a part of the conversation, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.